I'm thankful for a table. I'm thankful for a table. Sounds kind of silly, right? But this isn't an ordinary table. This is God's table. There's something special about the table. Not just the specialness of what it means to be invited to the table with Jesus, but something special happens when we're sitting at the table with people that we love. With our kids and our grandkids and our grandparents and our loved ones, our friends, our neighbors. The things that happen around the dinner table are being lost. And I think if we look at the symbology of the table and we look at it and how it relates to sharing a meal with our families, there's a lot of correlation between our spiritual walk, the journeys that we take in our faith. And sadly, one of those similarities is that it doesn't happen all that much. I know my family's guilty of this. Jennifer and I are tired. It's been a long day. We want to grab the best food in the world, the McDonald's right down the street, because it's easy, it's convenient, and forget the, sitting around the table because, hey, if we've got McDonald's, dog's going outside so we can actually sit in the living room and we're going to watch TV because it's America's favorite pastime. We don't tend to talk very much. We're either stuffing our face or watching what's on TV. But if Jennifer and I want to watch something on TV, then, well, heck, the girls don't want to have to watch what we're watching, so they go to their room, and what do? They watch TV. We skip the table. We've made relationships something like passing by. And if we're not careful, we tend to treat Jesus the same way. As a relationship that somehow can be built by just passing by in our busy schedules. But sometimes what's required is for us to sit down at the table and just talk and listen. So the series that we're looking at is simply called The Table. And we're going to look at, today we're going to start by looking at not even being at the table, but how do we get to the table? And then next week, we're going to celebrate mothers first off, but then we're going to look at the kiddie table. And then the third week, we're going to look at the big boy table, big girl table. And then we'll close out by looking at who all's invited. Who do we invite to the table with us? Because it's important. Who do we bring with us to the table? So we start this week by looking at how do we get to the table? Well, the thing is, everybody's invited to the table. Everybody is invited to Jesus' table. And I know some of you are going to balk at that. And there might be a couple reasons of that. One of them might be that you may think that you have to look or act a certain way before you can be invited to Jesus' table. But there's also some people, or maybe even some of you, that are wondering what I'm even talking about, invited to a table, and you're thinking, I didn't get that invitation. Did I miss that one? Did he text it and I don't have text or something? I missed that invitation. So I want to take this short amount of time that I have this morning to tell you about a gift that Jesus gives to everyone. And that gift is grace. So in Acts chapter 9, there's this guy that nobody likes. But something radical happens to him in Acts 9. You see, before Acts 9, we only know him as Saul. And nobody liked him if you were a follower of Jesus. You see, because Saul was very religious. He followed all the rules when it came to doing what God said in the Old Testament. He not only followed them, he had them memorized. And he hated anybody who said anything that could possibly go against his religion. And so his job was literally to find the people who followed this Jesus character and capture them and either make them slaves or kill them. That was his job. He was like the hitman of, like Jesus' time. It was his job to kill people because they didn't agree or they didn't line up with what he believed. Anything sound familiar to today's world? When Saul was on his way to Damascus, he had a surprise visitor. It was Jesus. Jesus shows up on a dusty, dirty road to Damascus because where is Saul going? He's on a rampage. He's got a signed order saying that he can hunt down all the Christians. And so he's seeking to just get rid of them. If you got a problem, just take them out. And Jesus shows up. How do we know it's Jesus? Well, one, it says it's Jesus, but he also says, "Why are you persecuting me?" You see, the thing was, he wasn't persecuting the people who followed him. It was all about who they followed. And so Jesus shows up, and it says that Saul became blind. He couldn't see, and Jesus gives him his orders and tells him, these are the things that you need to do. You need to go in Damascus, and there's a guy that's going to find you, and you'll find out the rest when you get there. Saul had a choice. Some of us might say, well, how is this a legit thing? I thought Jesus would never force himself on us. I thought Jesus would never force us to follow him, that he gave us free will. Saul still had a choice. You see, Saul was blind, but he still could have had his servant take him wherever he wanted to go. But Saul listened. And he went into town. He went into Damascus. So what is Jesus doing? What is Jesus doing in Saul's life? Let me give you a picture of what he's doing. Jeremiah 31 verse 3 says, "The Lord appeared to us in the past saying, I have loved you with an everlasting love. I have drawn you with an unfailing kindness." Ezekiel 34, 11 through 16 says this, "For this is what the sovereign Lord says, I myself will search for my sheep and look after them. As a shepherd looks after his scattered flock when he is with them, so will I look after my sheep. I will rescue them from all the places where they are scattered on a day of clouds and darkness. I will bring them out from the nations and gather them from the countries, and I will bring them into their own land. I will pasture them on the mountains of Israel, in the ravines, and in all the settlements in the land. I will tend them in a good pasture, and the mountains high of Israel will be their grazing land. There they will lie down in good grazing land, and there they will feed in a rich pasture on the mountains of Israel. I myself will tend my sheep and have them lie down, declares the sovereign Lord. And here's the verse I want us to focus on. I will search for the lost and bring back the strays. I will bind up the injured and strengthen the weak, but the sleek and the strong I will destroy. I will shepherd the flock with justice. And then in Luke 19:10, Jesus gives us an even clearer picture in these next couple verses where he says, "For the Son of Man came to seek and to save the lost." In John 12, verse 32, "And I, when I am lifted up from the earth, will draw all people to myself." So all of these scriptures, why do I use these? Because all of these scriptures are a picture of grace. Are a picture of what God does in our lives before we even know we've been invited to the table. Did you know that it's possible that God is working in your life before you even know who God is? John Wesley put it in these words. John Wesley, the not the founder, but one of the main guys behind the Methodist movement, referred to this kind of grace as prevenient grace. So what is prevenient grace? Prevenient grace is this: God is working in your life for your good before you even say, "Jesus, come into my life." When you're the farthest away from God, when you're a sinner and not even know that there's an option of grace, Jesus is extending it to you. He's working in your life. Last month, we looked at a series called There's a Cloud. And we look at the Exodus, and we looked at how this cloud, the Bible says that the cloud went ahead of them. And God was in that cloud. That God went ahead of them, preparing them for what was ahead, guiding them and directing them in the ways that they should go. God was working in their lives, even when they couldn't see that God is working. Have you ever sat down and really thought about how God has shown himself to you in your life? Honestly, have you really sat down and thought about that? Because our tendency is to just go through life, and when we're Christians, it's like, oh yeah, that's God. But for those of you who you weren't birthed in the church, those of you who came to know who Jesus was later in life, can you think back to a time where maybe you didn't even know who God was, who Jesus was, but you can look back in your life and say, you know what? There's no other way to explain what happened except that God was involved in it. Let me give you a couple examples from my life. One way that God showed up for me was sports. I'm thinking, what? The pastor just said sports, that God was... I'm not saying God made me an awesome athlete so that God used sports because that was the thing that got my attention. You see, one of the things about me was I have never had a drip of alcohol. I've never smoked. I've never done drugs. I've never even attended a party. And you know why that is? Because of sports. Because I wasn't going to do anything that could possibly not allow me to do sports. I didn't want that stuff to be a part of my life. Sure, I wanted to belong. I wanted to feel like I was part of the in crowd, just like any teenager does. But I was never willing to compromise in that area of my life. So God used sports to keep me focused. And that's, when I use those words, that's kind of a pun because I was diagnosed with ADD as an adult. What we discovered was that I more than likely had ADD my whole life. But because I was so active in sports, my brain was able to suppress the symptoms of ADD. And so I was able to focus. But as soon as I got in college and was injured and couldn't run like I used to run anymore and gained, the freshman 40, I'm an overachiever. I skipped the 15. I just went straight for the 40. And all of a sudden, focus became a problem. So God has used sports in a powerful way in my life. And I can look back and say, things would have been a lot different if I didn't have sports. Well, I was a drummer in school, and hey, wait, you probably already knew that, right? I didn't have to tell you that. So I played drums, marching drums in high school, and I wanted to go to the University of Tennessee. Had my heart set on going to the University of Tennessee. Actually had a tryout with the snare line in the marching band at the University of Tennessee. Had it scheduled. Got my SAT, got my letter from University of Tennessee. I'm sorry, but your SAT scores aren't, high enough. We encourage you to go to the two-year community college across the river, and then you can transfer to University of Tennessee if your grades are. I'm like, what? No. And guess what? I wasn't like LeBron James, so the band director didn't go to the admissions office and say, hey, this guy's in. Just didn't happen. So by the time I had gotten all my rejection letters, because I thought I could go to all the smart schools like North Carolina, Durham, just seriously, no, not happening for me. And so it just so happens that one of my friends, that had a good friend that felt called to be a pastor from a very young age. He was actually a PK and himself, and hadn't seen him for 2 years because he moved to Anderson. Out of the blue, he emails me and says, hey, where are you going to college? I'm like, literally, that's what I emailed him, had no clue. And he's like, hey, I'm going to Indiana Wesleyan, which just is in Marion. I'm like, India what? I was Catholic, had no clue what Wesleyan was. And I'm like, what's a Christian school? I've heard of Catholic school and knew I did not want to go there. And so it was like, what's this whole, and so he said, hey, I don't have a roommate yet. You should come to Indiana Wesleyan. I was like, okay. I applied. It was too late to get in with my SAT score. I'm like, lovely. Another test. I'm a horrible test taker. So what did I do? I actually studied for an SAT. I don't know anybody. Only geniuses, smart kids, study for an SAT. I'd never heard of studying for an SAT before. So I actually studied for an SAT. They said you need to get 880 to get in. No, you needed to get 880 to get on the waiting list because all the rooms were full. I'm like, oh, great. I take the test. They graded it. I waited impatiently. I got exactly 880. 80. Got put on the waiting list. They said you might be able to start in the fall, you might be able to start in the spring. We're not sure. It all depends, because they had sent out more acceptance letters than they actually had room for. So waiting list, here I was, even though I had a roommate. And he even stated, this guy's going to room with me. But I was on a waiting list. A week later, I got the call, you're off the waiting list, you're rooming with Andy Jellison. Like, great. Still don't know what Indiana Wesleyan is, but hey, let's go. Never been there before. The first day I ever went to the college was the day I took this SAT, and I was like, okay. So I went. Well, they have this week-long revival service at the start of each semester. Then, I don't know if it is now, it was called the Summit. And the second night, I gave my life to Christ. Freshman orientation, I went back to my parents when they came back for the weekend, and I said, God, God, God. That's all these people talk about, is God. When I went back to my house on Christmas break, my parents looked at me and said, God, 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 that's all you talk about. They were joking. They weren't being cynical. And God, 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 yeah, that's all I talk about. But that was God working in my life because I didn't have a relationship with him. But before I knew him, he was extending grace to me. And I promise you, if you stop and you look back in your life, you'll see moments where God is working or was working in your life. You see, but God uses people to also speak into your life, to reveal his presence to you. You see, just as much as Jesus had told Saul that you need to go into Damascus, Jesus also came and appeared to a man named Ananias. And he appears to him and he tells him, hey, there's this guy named Saul. You need to go to the tanner's house and you need to find him because you have an appointment for him and he's waiting to hear from you. Guess what Ananias said? Yeah, Saul, got that guy? Yeah, I heard about him. He's trying to kill me. And you want me to go talk to him. You want me to go look up the very guy who wants to kill me. So what's Jesus say? Oh, no. This isn't just any guy that wants to kill you. He's meant to tell the Gentiles about my love for them. What? He wants to kill the Jews, but he's going to preach to the Gentiles about you. Okay. Not quite sure what that's all about, but you came to me, so yeah, I'll go do it. And so Ananias goes and he tells Saul, who becomes Paul, about Jesus. And Paul gives his life to Jesus, and he's baptized that very day by Ananias. And he becomes God's mouthpiece to the Gentiles, to you and I. See, he used a man to speak into another person. What if Ananias had said, no way. No way am I going to talk to him. How many people have missed out on hearing about Jesus because you and I said, no way, not him, not her. They're not going to like what I have to say. They're going to think I'm being judgmental. They're gonna. What would have happened? So Ananias talks to Paul. And then Paul becomes on fire for Jesus, telling people about Jesus, even to the point where the disciples who are back in Jerusalem did not want Paul to come and visit. They're like, he's just trying to get on the inside, and he's going to take us all out as soon as he gets here. They end up letting him come to Jerusalem eventually, years, not days, years after he is preaching about Jesus. And in that 1 Corinthians passage in chapter 9, I think we miss the point a lot on this passage. I think we're quick to read over it, and we're quick to think, well, yeah, that was kind of cool, and then miss it. And so I want to read it again and then explain it a little more. It says, though I am free, starting in verse 19, though I am free, I belong to no one. I have made myself a slave to everyone. What? To win as many as possible. Win what? To the Jews, I became like a Jew to win the Jews. To those under the law, I became like one under the law, though I myself am not under the law, so as to win those who are under the law. To those not having the law, I became like one not having the law, though I am not free from God's law, but am under Christ's law, so as to win those not having the law. To the weak, I became weak, to win the weak. I have become all things to all people, so that by all possible means I might save some. I do all this for the sake of the gospel, that I may share in its blessings. Do you really hear what Paul is saying there? It does not matter who the person was that was across from him. He made himself like them for one purpose, so that he might win them, win their minds and win their hearts, so that they would ask Jesus to redeem their soul. That was the main thing. That was all he wanted to do. One pastor sums this verse up the best, I think, when he says in his church, one of their mottos, if you will, is we will do anything short of sin to reach people for Jesus Christ. So what is that? It's anything but sinning. Don't sin to do it. Don't kidnap somebody in order to tell them about Jesus. It doesn't work well. But anything short of sin. Let me ask you this. Is going into a bar sinning? No. Getting drunk is the sin. Not going into a bar. But why is it, if we see, let's just be like really broad on this. Why is it when we see the pastor walking into a bar, all of a sudden the pastor has a problem? Why? Why are there places that are off limits to Christians? Why do we do that? Why do we do that to other people? Because they're invited to the table. Just as much as you and I are invited. God used people in my life. He still uses people in my life. But guess what? Just as much as God used sports, he also used the coaches. And get this, I did not have one Christian coach. But God used them to help mold me as a follower of Christ. Because I had an attitude problem. Really bad attitude problem. There wasn't an umpire that was right within a mile of me. I mean, I wore glasses, but I could still see the ball better than they could, right? I didn't need the coach to get in the umpire's face. I took care of it myself. I was that kid on the ball field that you didn't want your kid to be like, except for the talent part. And I realized something. That I didn't want to be that kid anymore. Because a coach called me out. Said, hey, you were overlooked for this in awards this year because they all said you had a bad attitude. Like, that hurt. But guess what it did? Changed my attitude pretty quick. Because I realized that the only person that could control my attitude was me. It wasn't the people around me. It was me. Just to give you another highlight of my attitude, I think I was the only sixth grader that had to write a letter to the referees of the basketball game because I was the sixth grader who got the technical. I say that, one, because it's kind of funny. Two, just to show you, I needed something to happen in my life. And let me say this. My parents were not proud of me in those moments. So don't let that be a reflection that my parents are horrible. Because they didn't. I got an earful when I got home, trust me. But who are the people that speak into your life that God uses? Don't limit God's ability by saying that, oh, that person isn't relevant because they're not a Christian. Trust me, there are people who aren't Christians that God is using in your life. But God is always and has always extended the invitation to his table to grow as a follower of Christ. But you see, his table, though it's all inclusive, we come in stages. We come in stages to that table. In this stage, we didn't even know the table existed. We didn't even know Jesus cared. But yet he's been calling us to the table the whole time. Are you at the table? Are you still being called to the table? Because if you're not at the table, you know. If this is the first time you've heard of grace, the invitation's there. Jeff. Stand with me. If you'll reach out your hands and receive this blessing. Jesus invites you. Jesus has invited you your whole life. Some of you have accepted that invitation and you're in the process. If you're possibly even at the big boy table. But how is God maybe using you to invite people to the table? To make Jesus visible in their lives? I pray that as you go, that you'll take time to reflect on what God has done in your life, how God has moved and worked in your life, even when you didn't think that he existed. God, open our hearts to see you, even before we ever knew you. Jesus, I thank you that you knew us, even before the creation of the world. God, I pray that you would just speak into our lives. Help us to grow in what it means to be a follower of Jesus. Amen.